Part 2 of our Thinking Logically series dealt with figuring out the criteria for evaluation of arguments. And I think we now have a pretty good understanding of what criteria we're going to apply when we look at arguments from a rational standpoint. Now in Part 3, we're going to turn to looking at logic proper itself. That is just the relationship between premises and conclusions with respect to determining what inferences are valid. And in particular, we are going to be dealing with the following topics. First of all, we're going to be talking about how to determine validity and how to prove invalidity. And in this topic, we're going to be dealing with a notion that's called counterexamples. How do you provide examples to prove invalidity, which is what a counterexample is in this case. We're also going to talk about a technique that we call parallel argument, showing proving that an argument is invalid by showing that there's a parallel argument. And in that context, we're going to be looking at the notion, the concept of logical form or logical patterns, because we're going to see that patterns are very important in determining what inferences are good and bad. And finally, we're going to conclude looking at some of the most common valid patterns of inference. I think they probably cover perhaps 80% of the valid inferences. And the goal here in our whole Thinking Logically series was not to give you a course in logic, but rather give you enough of an understanding of logic so that when we turn to philosophy, when we turn to the writings of the philosophers, we'll know how to deal with their arguments, how to analyze and how to assess their arguments from the standpoint of what is it that's reasonable or rational to believe.